right, so now we're going to start off in this section talking about compassion collapse. And if you've ever had social psychology, this is going to sound kind of familiar to you, although it probably wasn't introduced using this terminology. So, emotion regulation can influence our reaction to other people, right? So, how we're trying to manage our own feelings and our reactions to things can cause us to view other people through different kinds of lenses. So, for example, I got this picture from when I was a kid growing up. There was an ad for the Christian Children's Fund, and there was this guy who would always find one child in whatever country they were advertising for that, that era, whatever, and it would really personalize his plea. And it was really an effective tactic because we tend to have compassion for individuals who have experienced hardship or trauma. So by finding one child to be the face of the situation was really a smart idea because a viewer can really empathize with that one person really well. We have a lot of compassion when it's on an individual basis. As the number of individuals increases, and this is from the same group, but it's a different era now. This has probably been 20 or 25 years since the picture in the top. And now what you see is a lot of children in the picture. As the number of individuals increases, we can experience what's called a collapse in compassion. Now it's harder to have enough compassion to spread to 20 or 30 kids in this picture to the degree that you could when it was one child and you really were empathizing with that one person. You had a lot of compassion for that one person. So a research study was conducted by Cameron and Payne in 2011, and their hypothesis was that a collapse in compassion is actually related to our own attempts at emotion regulation. That it wasn't that it just becomes too much and we're like, there's any help I give would be a drop in the bucket. It wasn't that kind of cognitive, logical change that made us say, I'm not going to help because it's too many. It was more about us attempting to regulate our emotions. So they argue that, having compassion for that many people is emotionally taxing. So as the number of victims increases, we regulate our emotions more and more. We see this when there's war that breaks out or there's an earthquake somewhere or whatever. The initial response is a lot of compassion, but then it becomes like so much. And a lot of times people seem to get a little bit numb or can't handle it anymore. And it turns out that the people who are best at emotion regulation are the ones who are the most likely to experience a collapse of compassion. The ones who do the best job of managing their own emotions are the ones who are the most likely to say, this is too overwhelming. This is too much. I can't have this much compassion all at one time. So Cameron and Payne actually conducted 3 studies, and I'm just going to show you the results of studies 1 and 2 because I think they'll illustrate the point well enough. In study 1, our dependent variable is actually a measure of how much compassion the person was feeling towards the victims that were depicted. And in the study, they used the genocide that was going on in Darfur at the time. And so they were rating how much compassion they felt for the victims. Now, on the left-hand side, it says help request, and on the right, it says no help request. This was an experimental manipulation where the participants were told to rate how much compassion they had towards their victims and keep in mind that they're going to be asked later in the experiment, how much money would you be willing to donate if given the opportunity? So that was the help request. In the no help request, they were just asked to rate how much compassion they were feeling towards the people that were depicted. In the darker gray bars, there was 1 victim that was described, and in the lighter gray bars, there were 8 victims that were described. So when there's a help request, what you find is that the compassion goes down when there's 8 victims versus 1 victim. When there is no help request, so there's no expectation that you're supposed to do anything about it, you see that the compassion actually goes up when there's 8 victims compared to when there's 1 victim. So there's something to be said for the interpretation that the reason why it's emotionally taxing is because we might be feeling a certain obligation to help. And when you're when you know you're supposed to do something or help, it may make you say, oh, there's 8, there's nothing I can do, that's too much. Whereas 1, I feel like I could. And that gets inverted when there's no implication that you're supposed to help. In study 3, they did it a little bit differently. So you see that emotion is the dependent variable now. So it's not about how much compassion the people are feeling for the victims that are described. It's just how much emotion they're experiencing, the participants are experiencing. And then on the x-axis, you see there's a series of different times that are being depicted there. And so everybody starts off at baseline at time 1. And so they're just now starting to hear the story about the victims in Darfur. And then they are rating the degree of emotion they're experiencing every couple of seconds. And they can turn the knob at any time, up or down, however they want to do it, across the time period while they're hearing the story about the victim or victims in the story that they're listening to about Darfur. All right, so the dark black line is where there's one victim, and the participants were in this was the manipulation in this study, when they were told to regulate their emotion. And so what they were told in that situation was to, okay, so you're going to hear the story, try and ignore any emotions that you're feeling or anything that, any compassion or empathy that you're feeling, and just answer based on, what exactly is going on. Like, try not to be emotional about it. In the experience condition, the other participants were told, okay, I want you to really think about how you're feeling. I want you to actually imagine what it would be like to be the person being depicted. So they were really encouraged to experience what was going on in the description. And so when there's one victim and they're told to regulate their reaction, or if there is one victim and they're told to experience, what emotions they're going through and stuff, you see that the degree of emotion is high. So when there's one victim, it doesn't matter whether you were told to regulate or not. There's high emotion. And so one victim, I've got enough resources to be compassionate. Now, if you go down to the little dotted line, just the ones that are legit little dots, 8 victims, and you're told to regulate. And you'll see that the emotions stay, just barely above baseline. Baseline's 1.8, and their emotions never really get above 1.9. So one victim, and I'm supposed to be regulating. I'm supposed to just be thinking about this logically. I'm not supposed to be getting all enmeshed. And we're seeing that their emotions don't get as high. When 8 victims regulate, the emotions stay low. I just confused myself about what I said, so hopefully I spoke correctly that whole time. This last line, which is the long dashes, that's 8 victims and experience instructions. So 8 victims, and you're supposed to imagine what it would feel like to be in their shoes and so on. The emotions don't get as high as when it's one victim, but it's higher than when it's 8 victims and you're regulating. So being told to get enmeshed and not try to control your emotions, you do get more emotional expression, right? So what Cameron and Payne concluded is that the people who are regulating, in the case of one victim, it doesn't work. They still feel the emotion. But when they're regulating and it's 8, they really get that collapse of compassion where they're like, this is too much. I can't be thinking logically about this. I'm just going to go ahead and be like, sort of, I give up. This is too much. I'm just going to say I'm not feeling anything for these victims. So they think it has to do with emotion regulation, that it's too overwhelming and we're trying to maintain our composure. And so when a person's told to regulate, you really see it happen. You see on the left-hand side, you see it happening when the person feels like there's a help request, either overt or maybe in real life it would be more implied. The more victims there are, the more you get this kind of compassion collapse. And then the same thing on the right-hand side. When they're told to regulate, you see that compassion collapse. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the effect of facial expressions coming from other people on our own emotional regulation. The facial feedback effect. Okay, so I've got a group of people here and they're all smiling at each other, right? You've been in this circumstance. When other people are expressing something on their face, it may have had an effect on your own emotional experience. Facial expressions can trigger emotional feelings and they can signal our body to respond accordingly. So when other people are smiling, it makes it more likely that we're going to feel emotional feelings that go along with a smile. I want to say happy, but that's not exactly the right word, probably. Pleasant. Our body might feel relaxed, right? Whereas if you have a person who's frowning at you, that might make you feel a little bit at least questioning. I send my intro to psych students out into public and I have them get a person to be their observer. And then their job, the student's job, is to smile at the first 10 people they pass and then frown at the next 10 people that they pass and then describe how people respond to it. It might be fun for you guys to try. I'm not going to make it an assignment. You might want to try it just for fun. Smile at a bunch of people and have your observer write down what are the people that you're smiling at doing. Like they have to be facing, your observer has to be facing the actual person who got smiled at because you've probably walked past them and you're not going to see their reaction. You need an observer to see their reaction. And then, frown at 10 people. What I typically see, and so you might want to test this and see if you get the same response, but what I typically see my students say is that when they smile, people tend to smile back at them. When they frown, people tend to look puzzled. And they're wondering why you looked me in the eye and frowned at me, right? Like you had a neutral face, you looked me in the eye and then you frowned. Like, why are you doing that? And they might be puzzled. And so you can imagine that another person's face like that, it's kind of a type of communication, isn't it? And so you may not have said, you're mad at me, but I just saw you look me in the eye and frown at me. Did I do something? Why are you mad? Now I'm tense. Your frown made my body respond in a particular way, right? You made me experience certain emotions, confusion. Maybe I'm a little angry at you for looking at me like that, whatever it is, right? People also mimic other people's expressions. So we see that especially with the positive ones. If you smile at strangers, they tend to smile back. If you frown at other people, they may become puzzled in part because they're empathizing with what you might be experiencing, right? Like, oh, you look upset. Now I'm upset, right? And so they're trying to figure out what your mental state is, and so they're responding with that empathy. There's also the behavior feedback effect, where it says that behavior can influence our own and other people's thoughts and feelings and actions. So I picked this photograph off the internet on purpose where we have handshaking because it's kind of I almost said touchy subject, but that pun is a little bit too much on the nose, isn't it? It's kind of a topic these days since COVID. Are we allowed to shake hands anymore? I was at graduation and we were like, are we supposed to shake the students' hands? I don't know if we're supposed. And my colleague was like, well, I'm just going to let the student take the lead. And I'm like, well, then you're going to be getting hugs. Like, if you don't want to be hugged, you might want to set up the parameters yourself, because we have this tendency to react to whatever else other people are putting out, right? So if somebody else puts their hand out, it's actually really difficult to not sort of just put yourself in that person's mindset. And if you normally had decided you have a no touch other people motto these days, it's kind of hard not to go along with them and act the way they're acting and shake hands. If other people's behavior looks happy, it's hard not to get swept up with that. I'll give you another graduation example, only this one's from when I graduated from college a million years ago. I decided you are welcome to laugh at me for being an old curmudgeonly grandma at 22 years old. Because I was like, I think this is a somber thing. And I see a bunch of my classmates have like inflatable balls and stuff. So I said to my husband and my parents, I'm like, if anybody, starts batting the ball around, I'm not going to swat it. I'm going to grab it and put it under my chair. And everybody, including my grandparents, are like, could you be any more annoying? Like, I thought that was a horrible idea. But this is what I'm going to do. Well, of course, when the ball was being batted around, it did look pretty fun. And I mean, everybody else was doing it anyway. So the somberness of the occasion's already been ruined. So yeah, of course I batted that ball. Of course I did. And I got beat up for that for the rest of like at least that day. And I'm going to say it probably extended for months, the teasing about, I'm not going to hit the ball. And then I was, of course, batting the ball because it was fun. Everybody else was having a good time. Why can't I enjoy myself? Grandma, stop being such a grandma, right? So I'm sure you guys can think of times where you were in a bad mood and other people jollied you out, or you were in a good mood and somebody pulled you down. These are good examples of how behavior can kind of cause us to react with like and kind behavior. And of course, we've already talked about how holding certain facial expressions can cause you to start to experience the emotion associated with it. Holding certain body postures can do that for you also. And so the things that other people are putting out can have an impact on us that then we attempt to regulate or not in our normal ways of attempting to regulate our own emotional responses. So I just thought I'd throw this little part in here about this give and take that we have with other people with regard to face and behavior, impacting our own facial expressions and emotional experiences. All right, let's go ahead and stop here, and in the next piece we'll do a little analysis of situations.